Imagine you are at a preacher's conference and everyone is asked to critique their colleagues' sermons. Most of what you get is predictable feedback. I wasn't clear what the takeaway was. I really hoped you'd loop that story back again at the end. I'm wondering if I were a single mom, someone with a disability, someone who is gay, how I would have heard your sermon. There's even the expected critique of delivery and voice, and then there is this preacher from a congregation in Texas who speaks up and time again over the 2 days begins their critique with, "Well, I asked myself as you were preaching, have I been saved?" Who says that? In Unitarian Universalist circles, who says that? And what does it mean? What does it mean to use that language here? Traditionally, of course, the meaning is pretty familiar, right? Generally, it means this salvation thing, if you've got it, you're going to heaven, not hell. Generally, it conjures up some sense of your having had a mystical moment of knowing, some kind of one-time pivot of heart and spirit toward a particular relationship with God or a particular set of truths or truth tellers that changes everything forever, for eternity, actually. Which reminds me, did anyone see the New Yorker this week yet? It has a cartoon of a man in a suit, and he's standing in front of that central casting angel who has the podium and the big book, which we assume has all of our fates written in it. And the caption says, "Well, you're just lucky that your father bought a building in heaven." Unlike college admissions, donating buildings is not supposed to be what gets you into the places where the saved go. And as Ben pointed out, in our history as a denomination, particularly the Universalists, we were shaped and named, actually, for our debates about heaven and hell. Famous for challenging an inherited truth that there was this place, that the loving force at the heart of the universe would send you to. So Universalists in the beginning kind of downgraded hell to a temporary place of hot reflection where you could spend, 10,000 years being, brought to your knees, I guess, and turned around until you got taken to the good place, the real good place. And then in decades and maybe a century or so to come, in one fell swoop, hell gets put out to the curb entirely. There's this otherworldly real estate deacquisition, and Universalists become heretics of the first order for saying that all would be saved, are saved, born saved. So we've been arguing about hell for a long time in this tradition. But from that moment in our inherited tradition onward, the conversation about hell shifted, right? I mean, if there were a hell, something that would get that name, forever after, it would have to be understood differently, right? We'd have to re-envision that word, that religious language, and we are constantly re-envisioning religious language, right? So then hell, it gets understood maybe more along the lines of the way Sartre saw it. Sartre, who said, hell is other people. And we'd agree, I think, right? It's other people and ourselves sometimes when we live alienated, broken lives, when we have lived, when we move out of broken relationships or terribly ill-ordered priorities, when we rip at the fabric of unity rather than weave it larger, when we are greedy or selfish or cruel or unjust, then hell was right here. And we were helping to make it right here. And it wouldn't be for eternity, maybe, but it would be a life sentence for us if we didn't do something about it. And then there was that other hell, the one that Ben described. Where are you, Ben? There you are. The one that happens to us in all the ways you described. That ultimately often is about feeling unloved or unlovable at our core, separated from others, alone. And all the reasons and ways that we have and the world has for abetting such hells. And from both those hells, we need saving, right? And so that old world salvation, it starts to change too in our hands. And when we use it, it starts to look more like what Ben describes, right? Salvation of this new kind, it happens in those moments when something or someone builds a bridge across any false notion of our innate separateness or unlovability. It's whatever or whoever helps us to learn to connect deeply and authentically to others and to ourselves. And it's when we're saved from the worst of ourselves, rescued maybe from some pattern of ill intent we've become ingrained in, or freed maybe from some ignorance. That means that our good intent has hurtful impact that we cannot see without someone else pointing it out. Salvation can show up as people speaking the truth to us, truths we need to hear, or offering friendship and forgiveness so we're welcomed back into relationship. It can be found in the wisdom of books or the lives we see around us living beautifully and deeply. In short, salvation understood in this more this worldly humanist translation of the old ideas is anything that helps us gain a larger, transformed, and more gorgeous sense of how we might inhabit our lives more deeply, more fully human, the best of our humanness. Our humanity. So this day, when we're celebrating some of what we are and do in community, it's a good time, I think, to name that I think one of the unwritten pieces of the covenant, or set of promises of the heart, which is the root of that word covenant, that we enter into together here, is that we will be partners in this salvific work here. And so the constant question of how to do that for one another, with one another. And it's clearly present in the programs that we celebrated this morning. It means, for instance, when we had our kids up here, that part of what we're celebrating is all the ways that we equip them from an early age with open and relational orientations, right? It's not like just about me, the distorted kind of individualism of America. That they're tuned to hold one another with careful intention. That we teach them to ask good questions and listen for wisdom in the room, not just in their own minds. And this, I hope for them, that they feel the zing of power and self-realization when you find yourself living out that wisdom of how to be and who to be in the world, and that zing makes you want more and more of that, wants it at the core of how you move through the world. And all of that, well, it continues in our adult forms of that work in our small groups, all of whom actually operate under similar covenants and goals, begins by talking explicitly, if you've been in one of these groups, or one that operates like it, like so many of our groups do here, like they should, explicitly about how we want to be together when we are together. This purposefulness to our community. So I don't know about you, I'm in lots of communities, right? Basketball leagues over the course of my life. Book groups outside of church, neighborhood groups, alumni groups, groups of friends from high school. None of us start out by talking about, now how do we want to be together? What are we promising to each other in this time together? It's left a little bit up to chance and goodwill, which can work, but doesn't always. Doesn't create often the kind of space that we're trying to create, right? Which is this place where everyone can show up fully in the room, as fully as we can make space for. And then in small groups, so many of our groups, ideally the topic of the day is always some version of this. What's the meaning of life? And how do we serve and live in and shape it all for the better, and ourselves too? The assumption is we want to be better together. And we see it all over in one another's lives. I regularly do. In the explicit and implicit invitations we offer one another about how we might live deeply. A. Powell Davies was an incredible minister who was deeply pastoral. His widow once, I had the luck of meeting, who said that he's famous for his prophetic sermons, but his pastoral ones were the ones he loved to preach. So deeply connected to what it meant for us to be in relationship to each other. But he's famous for many things, including help integrate, banish segregation from the city of Washington, our nation's capital, and his ministry there. All his people agreed to patronize only businesses that were integrated. Eleanor Roosevelt had her black and white women's teas in the basement of the church because it was the only integrated public space in the city. He knew what a good life was made of, and he is famous for summing up what the goal of all of what we do and how we are together thusly. He writes, the purpose of a life is to grow a soul. Growing a soul. Now that's not like throwing a bunch of seeds down, seeing what comes up. It is intentional, right? It means showing up with others who want to live deep and well together too, being purposeful together about how you are together. It means listening deeply and being the village for each other's kids, bringing one another home from the hospital, delivering food when the baby's born, driving someone to the airport when they're going home to bury their father. It's about laughing, too, at life's absurdities, witnessing to its beauty. It's about church retreat talent shows and all our very dubious talents, beautiful, dubious talents. And it's about going to your senator's office en masse because the earth otherwise can only speak through hurricanes and melted glaciers, and the homeless need to have a home. All this is what we are about, right? Because Sartre is right. Hell is other people. Cinco de Mayo celebrates colonial hell and liberation. But if hell is other people, then the opposite is also true. Heaven can be other people too. It's all about how we choose and agree to show up together. We don't just like it better when we are together. We are better that way. So are you and I saved, the preacher asks, 1,000 times in a single life? Yes, and 1,000 times more if we are lucky, like a plane on autopilot, which apparently is 95% of the time slightly off course, but somehow gets where it needs to go by all these small course corrections along the way. Deepening, connecting to each other like intertwined roots under the ground that keep us anchored against the storms. Growing a soul for the blessings of what we make here together. It's a good time to give thanks. I'd invite us into a brief moment of meditation and silence together. Blessings in our efforts to show up with intention and love in this life and here. Blessings for the candles lit today in sorrow and yearning, worry, thanksgiving. For all we bring into this space. I invite us into a minute of shared silence. That we might be present to what waits for us in the quiet before going out into the world again.